See, I'm an explorer. I explore the moon. I explore the inner space. So it's a part of the journey of my life to explore both science and spirituality. For the outer, I have science, and for the inner, I have my temples. This is a quote by the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, S. Somanath. For context, he said this after a successful lunar mission called the Chandrayaan. And I would like to firstly start this podcast by congratulating you on finishing your thesis.
Thank you so much.
You will be having a DR before your name.
Yes, another 2 months.
Another 2 months.
Yes, after my defense,
All
which will
right.
be in Jan, February.
We will come back to the quote because I would like to hear your thoughts on that. But firstly, I would like to know that what came first to you? Was it the science that you were in the scientific field and then you found a different aspect of life which intrigued you, which is spirituality? Or did spirituality come first and you pursued science after that in a quest to, kind of prove it to the scientific community? Because I see a lot of doctors are there who are doing this as well. So what was the case for you?
I had this inclination, not childhood, probably from class 7, class 8. I was exposed to the work of Vivekananda
Okay.
by my parents. And then somehow that inclination was that towards something spiritual, something which is more than the ordinary materialistic world. But it did not take a proper shape. There was no formal, systematic approach towards that. And then I enrolled for biotechnology, pharmacy and biotechnology. During my graduation time, I had some inclination towards spirituality again, with discussions with my colleagues and something like that. But again, it was not very systematic in that sense. And only after my graduation 2014 in biotechnology, I was thinking about what can be done as the next step in my career. Should I go to industry? Should I go for PhD? If I go for PhD, in what field should I go? I was exploring all those options.
Right.
That's when I was thinking, like, is there a way wherein I can merge my interest in spirituality, yoga, with my background in biotechnology? During that time in 2014, I was like volunteering at Ramakrishna Mission, Hyderabad.
Okay.
As a part-time volunteering. Every weekend, in fact. And during one of the conversations with the Swamiji there, I got to know that there is a lab at NIMHANS which is working on meditation. So somehow that Swamiji connected me with a professor there. And through him, I got to know about this lab, which I later enrolled in my PhD. And then I got into touch with them. I joined as a trainee. And then I came to Bangalore in 15 December.
Okay.
14 December, actually. And after coming to Bangalore, I was still exploring about spirituality.
Right.
That's when I got to know about inner engineering and Sadhguru. In that sense, I never heard about inner engineering until that point of time.
Okay.
I then did my inner engineering in 2015 December, May. And after that, I could see that just the simple practice of Upayoga and Shambhavi Mahamudra had such an impact on me. The first few months had such an impact on me that I was thinking that now I have an opportunity to work on this. I was still exploring which form of tradition I should pursue my PhD in.
Right.
But that's when, after my initiation, I got to know that, okay, there's something which I need to explore further, because until that point of time, there was not much research on Isha practices. There were hardly a couple of papers in that field.
Right, the Anadi one, which we discussed.
There was one Anati one,
yes.
2013, I think 2011 was the first paper published on Isha practices, the Shambhavi practice and the heart rate dynamics.
Right.
After that, there were a couple of more papers, but there was not much in that field yet.
Okay.
So that's when I approached. I was also volunteering in Bangalore during that time actively. I got to know, through one of the I got to know that there's a research wing in ashram, and then I approached ashram. I spoke about my research plans with them.
Right.
They were very actively supporting me. And then another 2 years went by while I was preparing for the entrance examinations and all that. Then 17, I gave my PhD examination, cleared the examination. And then the PhD journey started in 17. So kind of science and spirituality happened together in the sense that in the last 6 years, it was more like as I was going deeper within myself, I was also going deeper in the science of what was happening within myself. So in that sense, I approached this experientially at the same time scientifically. That I think gave me some unique perspectives on what's happening within us.
Right.
So that's the journey so far.
Even I, during my childhood years, I picked up a diary of Vivekananda. You know those empty diaries, those calendar diaries, which has the dates and all. And it had a Vivekananda's quote, basically a quote on every page.
Right.
And I just read those quotes at a very young age. And he would refer to religion as we are referring to spirituality today.
Correct. A practical religion he was talking about.
Yes, he was talking about religion pretty much as we talk about religiousness.
Exactly.
Which is going towards meditativeness, meditation, the inner quest. He used to talk about it like that. Today, it's religion is a dirty word now. But people see that these two things people feel are mutually exclusive. That in an individual, either religion or spirituality is there, or science is there. People look at it as a contradictory thing. So going back to the quote, we see that the chief of our space organization is saying that when it comes to external aspects, he is exploring it through science and space exploration. And when it comes to internal exploration, he is using Isha practices in this particular case. So, but what do you think that? Why do you think that this sort of this cognitive dissonance is there between these two fields?
There's no question about whether somebody is purely scientific or purely spiritualistic in that sense, because we have both these dimensions happening within us all the time. It's just that we ignore one dimension, which is still probably hidden from most of us, which we can refer to as spirituality. But whether we ignore it or we don't, it's still there. It's just a question about whether we take the right step towards realizing something spiritual within us, or
And so
we don't.
It's the same with science. It's still there.
Exactly.
Whether we know it or not, that is the question.
Exactly. So it's probably more to do with how do we approach truth. Truth is always there. How do we approach it, or do we live in ignorance for the rest of our life? That's the only question.
Many people, I feel, have a certain bias. Some people who are moving into science. For example, Andrew Huberman, he is a very celebrated scientist now, from Stanford, and he is available to the public eye, he's under the public scrutiny also. And he recently talked about his faith.
Right.
And people were, ripping their hair out that they thought, they thought this is our atheist, mascot who's going to propagate science and scientific interrogation and go about things in that capacity.
How can he talk about faith?
Yes, and he opened up about it, and he said that he has certain completely illogical aspects of life that he approaches it through religion. His own faith, he approaches it in that particular capacity. I don't know. I did not go too much into it. I just saw some clips about it. But that was surprising, and a lot of people were banking on him not exposing this side of him, because it's very easy to scrutinize these aspects. When it comes to your own spirituality, your own seeking, people feel a little vulnerable about it when they talk about it, because the so-called scientific community, if one approaches it with that kind of a worldview, you're like, where is it? It's not there. If I cannot see it, it's not there. So it exposes you in a certain way. And in India, especially, there is this trend, whatever is Western is considered scientific and good and intellectual and all of that stuff. But whatever is in our deeper traditions of spirituality, they refuse to see the scientific basis to that.
Correct.
And it is orthodox, primitive. What are you worshipping? You're worshipping an idol, you're worshipping the sky, you're worshipping all this.
Right. I think probably it has to do with how religion has been presented, and probably it has to do with the logical mind, intellect that we have, which fails to acknowledge anything which doesn't make sense to a person. Probably that's one reason which I think why religion has been looked at that manner. If we can present the science of religion, the science of spirituality in a way which a common person can understand, a logically verifiable manner in that sense. So if you can present something like that in that sense, I think people will take it, because it's all about understanding what's happening within ourselves actually. In a way, it's about understanding what's happening within us, going deeper into who we are, because a large part of our mind is unconscious in nature. How do we make that into a more conscious process? If we can present something like this in this manner, going from the unconscious to the conscious aspects of who we are, I think people will take it, because it has large implications in well-being and health and, at a societal level.
Right.
So if you can present this in this perspective, I think people will take it, because it has implications of huge.
And I do not blame people who are coming from different opinions, different worldviews, because at a certain stage in my growth, I remember very clearly, I was exposed to certain spiritual experiences at a very, very young age. And I had a very scientific and logical bent of mind as well. So what I did was I compartmentalized it into two separate categories. One was where I would apply rationality, because I have to, look both ways before I cross the street.
Right.
I'm not trusting any, otherworldly entity for that. So the logic aspect is very much there. The rationality needs to be there, especially when one wants to go into spirituality.
Definitely.
But then certain experiences happened which I had no explanations for. I had no reason, or it had no logic. It could not fit into my normal day-to-day worldview. What this taught me, it did not fit in. So for a very long time, I had separated life into two parts. What I could not explain, and what I could. What I could was useful for my day-to-day life. What I could not, I had no clue about. But the intrigue was there. I could not ignore it. And it took me a very long time before I could integrate these two aspects and connect it. So I feel that, like, for example, a person in your situation who's trying to study human consciousness and spirituality, we can clearly see that instead of spirituality and science being two parallel lines, it actually converges on an experiential level to the individual.
Correct.
It is not contradictory anymore.
Definitely, it's not. So I think it's very interesting that what you just said about that, because spirituality is often misunderstood. People think spirituality is about reading something spiritual. It's about praying to somebody, or it's about, worshipping a god who is sitting up there, something like that, something of that sort. People don't look at spirituality as something which is intrinsic within us and something which we can work towards, so that we live in a way which doesn't impede our growth, which doesn't let us be run by our limitations.
As you said, that spirituality is misunderstood. I feel I get along with rational-minded people way more than the so-called spiritual crowd.
Correct.
Because the spiritual crowd, I've been a yoga teacher for a very long time, and people have, people experience things which I could not imagine right in front of me. I have no explanations for it, how it happens, why it happens. But at times, and there is validity to that, there is a lot of authenticity to their experiences. But many a times, those experiences get interpreted intellectually in a very wrong way. You start seeing things, Why is that you are of a particular religion, born and brought up into that religion, and you see those gods only? Why don't you see some other god? So it's only the spiritual guy who sees things which are not there, really. And it's very dangerous. And I have to approach it with a lot of caution, because people come to me with that kind of a, trust. And I cannot just simply prick their bubble about it. I have to be very careful about it. But I feel that people who are rooted in rationality are ones who can actually enter into spirituality with a level-headed mind of what really is, what is not, what is imagination, what is existential, all of that.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense because we start off with logic because it helps us, as you said, approach spirituality in a particular manner. But there comes a time wherein we have to drop the logic. We can't carry the logic forward if we want to go deeper within ourselves, because some experiences, how much ever we try, we can't put it into the framework of logic. But logic is a useful first step, but we have to drop it some way down the line. At the same time, based on my experience as a practitioner and also as a scientist, what I see is that applying too much logic also is not going to help a person. People who are very simple by nature, they can approach spirituality much easier and much more effectively than people who are very, very logically thinking. Because it's all about discovering what's within us. And logic or the mind, mental, psychological aspects are a barrier towards approaching that. The more logically thinking we are, the more barriers we have towards approaching what is within us. The lesser barriers we have, the easier we can approach that. Probably that's the root of Bhakti Yoga, which is all about completely yielding yourself.
Love is illogical.
Exactly. You can't put that into a framework of logic. So in that sense, I think ultimately we need to be having this perfect combination of all the aspects within us, which include logic and emotion and the body and energies. If everything comes together, that's when spirituality can be much more easier.
I feel that logic is not necessarily what disconnects people, because I agree with you on the count that we have seen villages.
Exactly, it's
in
much
the
easier
Shaina
for them
Center.
to.
They don't have, I feel it's the wrong kind of education.
Correct.
Which severs your root from reality.
Correct.
Education these days, for example, what I have seen, many people I know personally who come to me for some solutions to something, but I see them, they are so brilliant at what they do in the corporate fields, sometimes in the scientific, doctors, absolutely brilliant in their respective fields. I mean, I'm in awe that they could be so deep into it and they have such a good, they're so good at their craft, basically. But when it comes to their own life, there is such a huge disconnect that they're not able to go through some aspect of their life, their relationships, that is just an absolute disarray. They're not able to conduct it gracefully. And then I thought about it that it's this kind of education, the way it is being bought, education
which
itself is
emphasizes
necessary.
much more on the logic.
There is some disconnect. I feel one reason could be that, we're taught like math, science, physics, chemistry, all of these as separate things,
Correct.
It's math period now, 45 minutes. It's biology now, 45 minutes. There is no cohesion.
There's no connection between.
Yes, whereas it is all
subjects. Exactly connected.
One thing is mirroring the other, actually.
Yes, that makes perfect sense because it has to do with how the teachers are trained as well, how passionate they're about talking about aspects which really make a difference in the students'
There
lives.
are teachers like that, few, but there
few
are
teachers, but I don't think I hardly encountered a couple of teachers like that in my career so far, who see education more as a way to survive than a way to discover what is within us or a way to discover what is around us. That sense of discovery is not there in education systems, which is proving very costly right now. Like huge crisis in terms of mental health and chronic lifestyle disorders. Everything is happening perfectly in their career, and they're really good at the craft, their art, or whatever career they're in, but they don't have any clue about what's happening within themselves. They're not basically taught about how to handle their own mind, how to have a sense of self-regulation, which is proving costly.
Right. I mean, we are actually observing a mental health crisis in the making. We're right in the middle of it right now.
Correct.
And it's only going to get versa and versa.
Right.
I mean, you have just come from IIT Mandi. We'll talk
Correct.
about that in a bit.
Yes.
But what I recently was looking at a news article, and I saw that there is a suicide rate of one IITian every month. So this being a premier institution, one of the best in the world, definitely in the country. And these are very intelligent people. Very, very intelligent people. These are the best people we have in a population of, 1.5 billion now. These few hundreds and thousands of students are the brightest, most sharpest minds ever seen. And when they are taking this step, I think it's more of a systemic issue now. It is not an individual issue anymore.
Right.
When the smartest people are doing it.
Exactly.
Then what are backbenchers like me going to do? So
yeah, I went through that system. I was at a time preparing for IITs. I know how those systems work. Like probably from class 9 onwards, we are put through that severe strain of preparing for IITs, coaching institutions from which start from 5 in the morning and until 6 in the evening, classes for IIT. And then there's a huge stress before the examinations, and then you don't clear it. There's more stress, what to do next. And I think we have got it completely wrong in terms of what needs to be emphasized.
Right.
Because we are taught everything that's required for survival, but we are not taught what is most essential in our lives, which is well-being. How do we use our mind for our well-being and not use our mind against our well-being? Probably this aspect is missing in our education systems, although it's changing a little bit these days because of the awareness that's been come up in the last one decade.
I wonder how much this awareness is really helping. I'm all about awareness about mental health. But I genuinely wonder that because on one hand, people talk about mental health care and the awareness about it. And on the other hand, we are probably the most racist, meanest generation right now. I mean, you go online and see, on one hand, people will be propagating mental health care. On the other hand, you'll be abusing somebody in the comment section. This is just, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think awareness is a good starting point, because until awareness is there, we still can't take the next step, which is about working towards prevention of mental health issues.
Right.
But awareness itself is still not enough, because you might be aware of everything about what's happening in the mental health field, but still not be sensitive to the suffering of the other person. Because until you have worked upon yourself on what is mental health and how does it affect you as a person, you can't really empathize with other person.
Yes, the empathy is pretty much inclusiveness.
Exactly.
That's
not happening. At the same time, what is happening based on my observations from Nimhans is that people feel burnt out. People who are in the field of mental health, they feel burnt out because of listening to so many patients, so many cases per day. They feel burnt out. And because of that burnout, after a certain point of time, they start feeling apathetic towards what's happening to the people around them. They see, they just can't seem to take the suffering anymore. It's something like that. So unless we also know how to work upon ourselves, we really can't connect with the other person completely while not suffering ourselves. I think that's something which is right now not happening. So even among the top probably psychiatrists and psychologists in the country, they are still not taught how to handle their own mind. They're not taught the tools of well-being. Rather, they're taught about how to deal with other person's mind. How do we fix the other person's mind? But we are not taught how to fix our own mind. It's something which I've been observing in the last 7 years being at Nimhans. I think that needs to change, and that can change only when we introduce some of these Indian knowledge systems into the education system.
Right.
That's the actually, it is connected to the conference I attended recently, which was also about how do we integrate Indian knowledge systems into mental health care?
Right.
How do we translate these huge tools of well-being into the government sector, into education institutions, and,
Right.
across societal space?
I feel massive work is happening along
It's
these lines
happening
now.
actually quite a lot, because Indian government has been promoting a lot, or especially probably since 2014, where International Yoga Day was first happened. From then onwards, government has been actively promoting it, all these traditional wisdom tools.
Yes.
And there's also huge impetus towards research in these areas.
There has to be.
Yes, it is actually. And yeah, I think we are at the right time right now to be working in this field.
Right.
I think because of the crisis that's happening in mental health.
Because I feel that I often interact with a few of my close friends, and they're psychiatrists. They just happen to be psychiatrists by profession. And they also happen to be into spirituality. And I have taught them yoga. They've come to my Hatha Yoga classes and all of that. And all of them are very firm on their thinking that yoga has its place.
Correct.
Along with therapy, even along with psychiatric medication. Sometimes yoga may be enough. Sometimes Hatha Yoga may be enough. But for a lot of people, I feel this is something which has to run parallel. Yoga becomes a more of a long-term thing, whereas the psychiatric treatment, even if it comes to therapy or medication, is something that is of an immediate need.
Correct.
So this is one aspect, but these same doctors tell me that the psychiatric community overall is not all corruption free. Because I know in many cases that individuals have been prescribed medication when they need not have. There are doctors who are sponsored by these companies, these pharma companies, because the pharmaceutical industry is the number two, largest
In terms of
industry in the world. Number one being the military equipment and stuff. The number two is pharma. So there is a financial incentive in terms of proving the medication that it has to take a place in your life. Now, in some instances, I'm very clear on this. It is needed. In certain situations, it is necessary. It does elevate, people's the quality of their lifestyle and living. But in many cases, it is putting them on a drug and them becoming completely dependent and addicted, physiologically addicted to it. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, this thing.
Unless psychiatry, psychology, and yoga come together, we can't treat the patient effectively.
Right.
And the recovery will be much quicker than medication alone. And we have this integrative medicine OPD in the MANS, wherein there are 3 doctors sitting, a psychiatrist, not 3 doctors, 3 professionals, 3 psychiatrists, there is an Ayurvedic doctor, and there's a yoga therapist.
Right.
All of them will look at the patient and design a customized plan to the patient, which incorporates dietary modifications, which incorporates different yoga practices, breathing practices, meditation, along with medicines. This will be much more effective than the conventional medicine-only approach.
But there is so much resistance to what you're proposing.
Exactly.
In real life. People do not connect these things. Like, for example, I promote physical fitness quite a bit. In whichever form. You want to learn Hatha Yoga, I'm a Hatha Yoga teacher. You want to learn fitness, go lift weights and all. I'm all for that. But people have a huge amount of resistance towards taking these small steps, seemingly unrelated to their mental health. Like meditation, that is Hinduism. Yoga, that is of course Hinduism. Prayer, oh no, that is Christianity. Like things like that. So there is a lot of resistance towards this. And there is this idea that it's your genetics are fixed and they determine whether you have a chemical imbalance or whether you have depression. And this I have seen, I have explored, the science enough to know that it's not necessarily a fixed thing for everybody. Like, what do you think about that?
Even among the most educated among us, people still think yoga and meditation belong to a particular religion. Unless we see the science of it, unless we remove all the religious connotation towards these things and look at the science of it,
Yes.
what it does to us, we cannot really approach yoga and meditation in a very open manner. That I think that needs to go. That can go with awareness again, awareness, and and that's where scientists come into the picture, play a big role. Yes, genetics part of it. There are some conditions, psychiatric conditions, wherein genetics plays a big role. You can't really do much about it. But there are other conditions, like mostly depression, anxiety, those kind of things, which genetics and environment both play an important role. It's like an interaction between genetics and environment, which plays a role in deciding whether a person gets depressed, or if the person is depressed, how the recovery will be. But as far as evidence goes right now, environment plays a big role. Environment, and at the same time, what we do once we become depressed. The subsequent steps play a big role in recovery from depression. And until now, even depression, anxiety, or major mental health disorders are not diagnosed based on brain markers or blood biomarkers.
Okay.
It's still diagnosed by clinician. We still don't have robust markers in the brain or in the blood, the body, which decides if a person is depressed or anxious or whatever it is. It's still based on the criteria defined by psychiatrists. There's certain criteria which they follow, based on which they diagnose a person as depressed or anxious or whatever it is. What this tells is that brain, whatever it is, however the brain might be, however the blood biomarkers might be, we still need not be depressed. We still need not be anxious. We can come out of it with proper guidance.
Can you comment on this? I have kind of gone through a little bit of literature on this, that how meditation and yoga alters gene expression.
It's like we have certain genetic tendencies towards, say, depression or diabetes. Even though we have genetic tendency, it doesn't mean that we become depressed or we become diabetic. It's the expression of genes which matter more than the presence of genes by themselves.
Once again, we're coming back to the environment and
Exactly.
habits.
Expression of genes is much more important than the gene being present.
Right.
So how this expression happens can be determined by us. So in that sense, say if we choose to be healthy, we choose to be more active in our lifestyle, probably we can turn off the expression of genes which predispose us towards diabetes. If we choose a sedentary lifestyle, probably we turn on the genes which predispose us to diabetes, diabetic. So in that sense, meditation and yoga have been shown to be modulating the expression of genes. So there are studies which have been done which showed that even 1 day of intensive meditation can upregulate anti-inflammatory genes and downregulate pro-inflammatory genes.
Okay. What does that mean?
So basically, inflammation is the body's response to anything infectious or anything stressful.
Right.
And if inflammation goes up, it leads to many stress-related disorders.
Does this include immunity?
Immunity, yes. Inflammation is part of the immune response, basically, towards anything infectious in nature, or anything, even, for example, psychological stress that we have can lead to inflammation. And this inflammation is at the core of most of the chronic lifestyle disorders, ranging from diabetes to cardiovascular disease to cancer to even mental disorders. So this inflammation is triggered by chronic low-grade inflammation, chronic low-grade stress, which leads to inflammation. And meditation can downregulate these pro-inflammatory genes and upregulate anti-inflammatory genes. So some studies show that even 1 day of intensive meditation can upregulate these anti-inflammatory genes and downregulate the pro-inflammatory genes. And there is one study which was done on Isha practitioners, which was published in a journal called PNAS, which is one of the top journals in the world. So they looked at people who were enrolled for Samyama program. So they enrolled these people and they measured their blood parameters in 4 time points. The first time point was like 5 weeks before the Samyama start date. The second time point was just before the Samyama. Third time point was after Samyama, and fourth time point 3 months after Samyama, I guess. So they looked at the expression of different genes during these time points. What they observed was that after the Samyama program, there were many genes which were upregulated, which are involved in interferon gamma pathways. So interferon gamma is a very important marker of innate immunity. It helps in fighting the viruses. For example, when COVID-19 was there, people were giving interferon gamma injections and all that. So this interferon gamma is a marker of innate immunity and how robust the immune response is towards any infectious disease. Right. So they found that the interferon gamma signaling went up after the Samyama retreat, right, which was quite amazing because that was probably one of the first studies which showed increase in immunity without causing inflammation. Because if immune system is overactive, it can cause inflammation. So it has to be in the right balance, right, not hyperactive as it causes inflammation, not underactive, which leads to susceptibility to various infectious diseases. It has to be in the right balance. And that's what these practices do in that sense. So I think these two studies were some of the prominent ones in the recent few years.
You spoke about how the attention from the medical perspective needs to shift from psychiatric evaluations, as I understand, to brain biomarkers. So you're moving from something which is not so exact to a more exact science in terms of psychiatric treatment.
No, not in that sense, because even brain markers we don't have for psychiatric ailments. Psychiatric ailments are still diagnosed by clinicians,
right,
based on certain criteria which is given in DSM-5 and ICD-10, like that. So what this tells is that we are very different in who we are, like personality. There's so many factors when it comes to mental illness. Physical illness we can say based on, say, diabetes, we can say based on the blood glucose levels, we can say person is diabetic or not. Similarly with something like Alzheimer's, wherein if there is a certain plaques in the brain, we can say that the person is Alzheimer's, something like that. But when it comes to mental illness, we still depend on the criteria by the criteria defined standard textbooks.
Does this imply that psychiatry is not an exact science? Would it be too much to say this? Or
yes, it is not an exact science in that sense, wherein you can clearly say that this person, based on this marker in the brain, is depressed. We still can't say that because there's a lot of variability. There are a lot of subtypes and there's a lot of overlap.
Right.
Between, say, depression and anxiety, there's so much overlap. These are called as comorbid conditions.
We spoke about the awareness around mental health care. So one aspect I see is it is good that people are coming to know, because parents come to me, their child is depressed, and the child is like a 30-year-old guy, and he's telling me about all the difficulties that he's going through, and I empathize with him. But the parent is like, his thinking is actually screwed up. He's just negative. So on one aspect, the awareness helps, in terms of understanding what people are really going through, because they think it's the other. It's always the next generation who's mentally troubled. Actually, the previous generation had plenty of mental health issues. It's just that they're very unaware, and the stigma is there, so they don't want to enter the psychiatrist's office also.
That's true. Yeah.
That is there. On one hand, this is the positive effect as far as I see it. On the other hand, the negative impact of this awareness was demonstrated actually by me when I told you that I think I have ADHD, and you said, listen, you're not self-diagnosed.
Correct.
So we are watching all of these reels about, narcissism and what is abuse, what is not, what is ADHD and all of this. And we are very misinformed about it also.
Correct.
Because, for example, I was reading into one thing, and the psychiatrist was questioning, did you go through trauma or was it just a difficult experience? So there is a distinction. These are now becoming medical terms, and they have entered into the layperson's language, and we're throwing around words like trauma and narcissism. Everybody's ex is a narcissist. Nobody themselves is a narcissist.
Yeah.
Your ex is a narcissist.
Right.
This is something that I'm observing.
I think, yes, that's in a way true, because it actually comes down to categorizing something as depression or something, anxiety, something like that. And what that categorization does is it prevents us from taking charge of the situation. Say, if we think that we are depressed, we think that we're just like that.
Yeah.
Just that categorization that I'm depressed will have a big impact on how a person will respond after that.
Instead of looking at it as a condition that we're going through, just like any other illness.
Yes. That categorization is useful only for diagnostic purposes. But we should not categorize ourselves as depressed or anxious or, as of any kind, basically. Because once the categorization comes in, we just can't come out of it so easily, because it's a big hindrance to our well-being.
People cling to the identity.
Exactly.
And then there is a community aspect to it.
Correct.
So this mental illness at a very young age, some people who actually have obsessive compulsive disorder, they usually do not talk about it with so much flair, But, you organize your bookshelf in a particular way, the people say, no, I have OCD. This is not OCD. You just enjoy having things in a particular order.
You're just labeling it as OCD.
Yes. So it's thrown around like that. And it's, I feel this is more so in the Western society, that it's categorized as, this a need for attention. It is coming down to that as well. That certain children who have not received that kind of an attention, suddenly you label yourself as some medical thing, and they actually, I've seen in some of the Instagram reels that no medical professional will diagnose them, and they're angry about it. That nobody is saying that I'm depressed, but I am. So there is this, it's a very difficult situation we are in today about it.
Because I think labeling is important, again, for the diagnostic purposes, but we should not self-label. And how do we prevent that from happening is a big question, because we have so much information. Say, I have certain symptoms, I just log into Google and see, based on my symptoms, what the condition is.
Google tells you have cancer.
You have cancer or you have depression. And once that enters our mind, that's it. We become disempowered in that sense. How do we take charge of the situation rather than becoming disempowered, and then we go through a huge crisis in the sense that how we respond to that situation makes the problem even more worse than the problem itself, which probably is a series of symptoms which can be worked upon, but the response to it makes it much, much worse. And then it's a downhill after that, downhill progress after that.
Right. This is also very common amongst the medical students. They first learn about all the different illnesses, and they start getting this kind of hypochondriac kind of a thing. They get very paranoid about it. Okay, I have this. Same with mental health conditions. So for example, we have such short attention spans. Sadhguru today, he was speaking about the attention span of the average American a couple of years ago was 12 seconds. Yes. Now it has been reduced to 5 seconds. So this, I feel, I'm thinking would be the environmental effect of, the social media and all. These are environmental factors, and they have a certain impact on our brain and attention spans. So now naturally we are producing ADHD children because of these environmental factors.
Yeah, huge role to play, environmental factors. How do we promote these things in such a way, promote, the tools of well-being again, in such a way that we move huge sections of population from these so-called disorders to well-being?
So I know you're not allowed to speak about what your thesis was.
Actually, I can speak.
Okay.
Yes, we can speak about it because we are not showing any figures as such right now.
Okay.
And because I submitted my thesis, we can speak about it.
Okay.
And once the thesis gets published in the next 1-2 months, I think it can be out in the open as well.
Okay.
But we can discuss about it.
Can you give us like a gist?
Yes, I think so. Where do I start? So this is
for the layperson like me.
Yes. You're not a layperson.
Explain it to me like I'm 5.
So my thesis was on Isha Yoga, its impact on cognition and well-being. So yeah, before that, I would like to talk briefly about what my lab does, because it gives a better context to my own study. So we are Center for Consciousness Studies at NIMHANS, which is exploring different aspects of consciousness from the Indian perspective. How do we integrate the Indian wisdom with modern neuroscience? And the implications on consciousness and well-being is what we study. So we've been studying the science of yoga and meditation for the last 45 years, probably. 1975 was the first project in our lab, which was the first study in India, sponsored by the Government of India, Ministry of Health and Education, way back in 1975, called as Project Consciousness. So this was led by Professor Desi Raju, who's considered one of the top neuroscientists in India at that time. And he was looking at the science of pranayamas in some advanced yogis. Okay. And after that, a lot of work happened on Vipassana meditation. We have been working on Vipassana for the last 20-25 years. And then we started studying different traditions of yoga. We did some initial work in Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. Then we did some work on Brahma Kumari's Raja Yoga. Okay. And then heartfulness meditation. So like that, we've been exploring different traditions of yoga. And I proposed to work on Isha Yoga. That's how this work integrates with a larger perspective, larger framework of what our lab does. And so that we try to understand this, because there are a lot of commonalities in what these practices do. There are some differences which are very unique to the traditions involved. At the same time, there are some commonalities. So we try to understand this from the neural perspective. So in Isha Yoga, I have looked at basically 3 categories of people. One is the advanced Isha meditators, how I've defined advanced and the novice Isha practitioners is based on what kind of practices they do. So somebody who's initiated into Samyama is an advanced practitioner. This is just for the purpose of study, and not to categorize somebody as an advanced practitioner or a novice practitioner, not like that. Just for the purpose of the study and to carry out proper analysis, we had this categorization. So advanced practitioners were those who did Samyama, and the novice practitioners were those who did not do Samyama but would have done either Shambhavi or Shunya. And then meditation naive controls. That is, people who have not done any form of yoga, who do not have history of any practice of yoga as well. Those people are meditation naive controls. So we have these 3 groups. And then we acquired people, like I acquired 42 advanced practitioners, which included close to 20 Hatha Yoga teachers. Right. And then we had approximately 33 novice practitioners, and we had 28 controls. It's called as a cross-sectional study. So research studies are usually of various kinds. Some are called as cross-sectional studies, wherein we acquire volunteers at one time point. They come to us, to our lab, at one time point, and we take measurements. So there are other designs like longitudinal studies, wherein we acquire the data from the people at multiple time points, wherein they come now and they come probably after 6 months, after 2 years, like that, multiple time points. So mine was a cross-sectional study which acquired data at single time point. Okay. And it's important to acknowledge the limitations at the beginning itself. So cross-sectional studies, the limitation is that we cannot infer causality to the findings. Which means? Causality, that this does this,
Okay.
which can happen only in longitudinal designs,
Mhm.
wherein we follow people for, say, 6 months
Mhm.
and we have an intervention. Then we can say that because of this intervention, this happened. This is called as causality, cause and effect.
Right.
This causes this. This cannot be established in cross-sectional designs. That's a limitation which I have to probably share with you in the beginning itself.
Right.
And but at the same time, we cannot do longitudinal studies for a very long time. Say, I cannot follow a person from the day he gets initiated into Shambhavi and until he does Samyama. And after that, probably somebody will take 4 or 5 years. And it is difficult resource wise to do such long studies. So scientists usually, do these cross-section studies to overcome that limitation.
Because it is resource intensive.
It's very resource intensive, and multiple time points. There's a lot of attrition. People who say do the first recording, they probably might not come for the third recording or second recording because of many factors, and that loses the data point we have. So this attrition happens in longitudinal studies, which does not happen in the cross-sectional study because it's a single time point study. So having discussed this, let me describe the study design which I had. So we use this technique called as EEG, which is electroencephalography, which is a technique to measure the brain oscillations. And then we had MRI in subset of advanced practitioners. MRI is a technique to measure the activity in the brain, where in the brain activity is happening, the kind of connections between different brain regions, etc. And third is psychometric questionnaires, that is subjective questionnaires.
Okay.
How do they report? How do a person feel, what's going on within them? How do they rate their stress to be? How do they rate their well-being to be, etc. EEG and MRI is an objective measure of cognition and well-being. So these two are important because subjectively a person can be biased towards what might be happening, but objective markers are more objective in that sense, right? So we employed these 3 measures, and then we had this design wherein initially we had the participants just relax for 4 minutes.
Okay.
We acquired the EEG data. This is called as the resting state.
Not
EEG.
Meditating,
just relaxing. For 1 minute, eyes open, 1 minute eyes closed. So 1 minute eyes open, they have to look at a point. It's like a dharana state.
Right.
They have to look at a point on the monitor and just be relaxed. The next 1 minute, they have to keep their eyes closed and they just be in a natural state. This is like 4 minutes. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. 4 minutes of resting state data. And then we had the Sukhakriya Pranayam, which the meditators do for 6 minutes. And for the controls, what they do is they just do simple alternative nostril breathing as a control condition for the Isha meditators.
Right.
So in all these research designs, it's important to have a control condition with which we compare what's happening in the meditators, for example. And then we had about 15 minutes of breath watching session, which also controls did. We instructed the controls before the session began, what is breath watching, how to do, and all that. And Isha meditators did their breath watching as usual. This was for 20 minutes totally. 6 minutes of Sukhakriya Pranayam and 15 minutes of, approximately 15 minutes of breath watching. After this, we again had a resting session of 4 minutes. Same eyes open, eyes closed. After this, we had a cognitive task, which measures their attention and working memory. And then we had another resting session. Then we had a Shunya meditation. And then we had another resting session.
Okay.
So during Shunya meditation, controls were simply told to sit still and, just be in that state of, not exactly Shunya, but, something similar to that state, wherein they are told to ignore what's happening in the mind and not follow a thought or something.
Theoretically, they were told.
Theoretically, they were told what to do during that Shunya state. So we label this as sitting still state. Just sit still and be, in that state. So this was the entire study design. And throughout this period, we were recording the EEG from the brain. So we used 128 channels to acquire the data. Okay. So this is called as high density EEG, which acquires data from all the brain regions, basically. And then we were also acquiring the respiration and heart rate data, etc. So this was the study design for EEG. We also acquired the questionnaire data before the session began, and we acquired MRA from subset of advanced practitioners.
Okay.
So, so let us discuss about the findings. This was the oral design. So when we look at the resting state data, which was for 4 minutes, so meditation, before we go to the findings again, so we'll be taking a lot of
detours
in this discussion.
That's all right.
A lot of digressions, because it's important to set the right tone before we go to the findings. So meditation usually produces something called as state effects and trait effects.
Okay.
So state effects are those which are produced immediately or during meditation. The effects produced during meditation or immediately after meditation. Something like relaxation, feeling relaxed, feeling more calm, reduction of stress. These are the state effects of meditation, which would not persist probably 1 hour later. Or probably you do meditation in the morning, by evening the effects have waned off.
More temporary in nature.
It's more temporary in nature, which are not long lasting. And then meditation also produces these trait effects, which persist beyond the meditation session itself, which are called as altered traits in the literature. So these are the long lasting changes in how we are as a person, in our way of being, in our personality, and it's more towards long lasting changes that happen within who we are. And these trait changes reflect in the resting state data, which is important because resting state, you're not doing anything. You just come to the lab, you just sit relaxed, you measure the brain oscillations. These brain oscillations measured during the resting state indicate altered traits. And in the resting state, we found pronounced differences in the EEG signature, in the advanced Isha meditators, and also novice Isha meditators compared to the meditation naive controls. So what are these changes?
And this is very interesting because when I go through certain experiences, and I have shared this on my YouTube channel as well as I went through the programs. Certain programs I have described as completely life-changing.
Life-changing, right.
And it has been such a drastic change for me that in the scape of how I perceive life, moment to moment also has changed so drastically. But I never knew that it could be measured.
Right.
So even people around me took a while to adjust to the changes. Initially, they don't see it, but soon enough they start to see, especially people closer to me.
Right.
This guy is not the same at all. This has happened again. So on the spiritual journey, you would agree that this is something which happens again and again and again.
Yes.
Such drastic changes that it can't be labeled as growth.
Correct.
It has to be
tectonic shift in how we are as a person, actually.
Yeah. So I never knew that. It is interesting that even in a resting state, because it changes the very, the
nature of your being.
Yes, yeah.
It changes your breath.
Yes.
It changes your heart rate. It changes your brain markers completely. And I think resting state effects are much more important than state effects, because state effects come and go. People can feel high during meditation, and probably they go back to their original nature after they come out of meditation.
Right.
And also there's this interaction. It's not like state effects are like not influencing the way of your being.
Yes.
But they become trait over time.
Like
state effects become trait effects.
I can still get angry,
Correct.
But the thing is that when I come back down, or the rates and all, I don't want to go into that, but like my baseline has shifted completely. Yes, yeah.
So basically this baseline is a trait effect. Probably after many years of meditation, your baseline would have shifted upward.
Yeah.
That is the trait effect.
Right.
It completely rewires our brain. It completely rewires who we are as a person. So those are the altered traits which are of utmost significance when it comes to what meditation does to as a person, because that's what we are looking at. We don't want something which gives us high, but we go back to living a same old self. There needs to be complete dynamic shift in who we are as a
Yes,
person.
as a Hatha Yoga teacher, when I would make people do certain practices, and I had the privilege of seeing changes happen over a very, very long span of time, over a period of years also I've seen them. So what I saw was, of course, immediately as you do a certain practice, there are certain positive benefits. But over a longer period of time, the changes seem to be a lot more permanent. That we were speaking about, this psychiatric medication. People have been completely weaned off their psychiatric medication. Not all, but many of them.
Correct.
If not completely weaned off, they have reduced the amount of medication. So these I view like as permanent changes.
Permanent changes, correct. I think that's what spirituality is all about. It's not going back to who we are originally, but complete transformation of who we are. And that is what meditation is doing.
Yeah, otherwise, what would be the point? People would say that, okay, I'm meditating, I'm peaceful for a little while,
and then I'm back to normal.
Yeah.
So it has to transform who we are as a person. And in that sense, we can also compare. People might argue actually. Even psychedelics would give a high.
Yes, that's true.
People actually argue in this manner.
Yeah.
Say, somebody might say, I have taken 20 years to attain a certain state within myself. And somebody might say, 15 minutes I take a pill and I'm in that state. What's the difference? If you take 20 years, I'm getting there in 15 minutes. What's the difference? The difference is trade effects.
Right.
Somebody who has gone through psychedelic experiences, they won't come out transformed.
Right.
They just still go back to their compulsions, which does not happen in meditators.
I feel, I don't know if you've looked into it, but certain, substances have and are being used now and studied for, say, trauma healing.
Correct.
I was listening to Yeonmi Park. There's this girl from North Korea. Have you seen that?
No.
So this lady from North Korea, she escaped North Korea, went all the way across China. Incredible journey on her part, and ended up in the US.
Okay.
In order to resolve the kind of suffering she went through, certain substances were used, and along with therapists, and it was in a controlled environment.
Okay.
And she experienced a lot of healing,
Transformation.
So, but I feel that people who kind of abuse these substances,
Correct.
they go up to that height, like the trait effect you mentioned, the state effect. The state effect you mentioned. They reach that and they
come back crashing.
They actually come back down lower than they were.
Correct.
Because it takes something out of you. There's always the hangover after any substance. It takes a little bit. The price is that it is going to leave you lower.
Correct. But at the same time, I think we should mention about certain people who might require these substances, because some people are in such a state wherein nothing helps. And there is actually evidence which shows that some of these substances, if used in a controlled manner with proper guidance,
in very specific instances,
very specific doses, not abusing kind of thing, can help a person overcome certain mental psychiatric disorders. Which I think should be okay, because that's what research is showing. We should not take the stance that this is not correct. I think it should ultimately help the person.
Yes.
If research shows that it might help, I think I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Like going a little off topic here, but I also saw that your psilocybin,
correct,
your magic mushrooms, this was implemented in certain terminal patients in Canada through the permission of the court as well, and many doctors, and all of that happened. And that allowed the terminal patients to come into terms with their
condition,
death, actually, because their time here was very short, basically.
Right.
And usually people go through a lot of anxiety and suffering
during that phase,
coming to in terms with your own mortality. So not in the spiritual process, we start looking at it since day one.
Correct.
And we don't know, some people have the privilege of having a lot of time doing this contemplation.
Again, we need to be having proper evidence base to it. What are the implications of, say, legalizing some of these substances?
Yeah.
it's a whole
different
discussion. And going back to the topic, can be observed in the resting state. So we observed trait changes in their resting state data. And what did we find? So again, a small digression in the topic, because we need to discuss a little bit of brain oscillations before I talk about what we found. So brain oscillations, in a very simple manner, range from low frequency to high frequency. So our brain is an electrochemical device, you can say, and at every moment of our time, every moment of our experience, either sleeping or waking, we have these oscillations at different frequencies and different proportions during different activities that we perform and different states of consciousness. So these oscillations range from the low frequency, which we call as delta oscillations, which are from 0.5 to 4 hertz. And then we have theta oscillations from 4 to 8 hertz. We have alpha from 8 to 13 hertz. Then beta from 13 to 30. And anything above 30 is called as gamma oscillations. And usually, some of the states of consciousness, some of these oscillations are predominant. For example, during deep sleep, you observe more of delta oscillations, which are the low frequency oscillations like this. And during, transition from wakefulness to sleep, we observe theta oscillations. And also, we are relaxed and focused on something, or we observe theta oscillations. Theta also we observe during, say, active working memory, or during navigating the space. That's when we observe theta oscillations. And then coming to the alpha oscillations, it's observed usually when we're restfully relaxed. We're not doing anything active, restfully relaxed. That's when we observe alpha oscillations. And then beta oscillations we observe when we are actively doing something.
Which one is the hypnotic state?
Hypnotic state is usually in theta state.
Theta, yes.
Theta state. And beta oscillations we observe when we are actively engaged in something. So right now, probably your brain is producing a lot of beta oscillations because you're listening to me actively and paying attention to what I'm doing. You're alert. That's when you observe beta oscillations.
Are you calling me a beta?
No. Beta is like everybody produces beta. So everybody
I'm the alpha.
Alpha.
Joking.
Yeah. So everybody produces beta oscillations, and it's just the level of beta which might vary from person to person. And then there is whole of this gamma oscillations, which are the high intensity oscillations, which are high frequency but oscillations, rapid oscillations, which signify perceptual clarity, which signify very intense alertness, which signify expansiveness in awareness. That's the whole different creative insight. It also describes creative insight. So these oscillations usually can coexist. Delta can coexist with gamma. Theta can coexist with gamma. This is called as coupling. But this we don't usually observe in most people. If somebody is in, say, beta state, they usually are not in the theta state.
So is it that different parts of the brain are lighting up?
It's the communication. It's the communication. It's the connectivity. Because theta, for example, can be seen in this part of the brain, and there can be beta in some other part of the brain. So they can coexist, but usually, it's like so when we observe the brain, we are recording EEG. When you observe signal from one particular channel, we see oscillations like this. This one oscillation, which we observe in the screen, consists of all the oscillations.
Overall.
It's like this. And we use some processing techniques to decompose the signal into individual components. And how these individual components vary is what we are looking at.
Can you measure different regions of the brain in terms of, say, like the prefrontal cortex? If you were to measure frequencies from that particular neural network, is that something which is possible?
That is not possible through EEG, because EEG is a technique which will tell us about the activity of the whole brain. So we can't say that this is coming from prefrontal cortex.
Right.
That needs, MRI. MRI tells us about where the activity is happening.
Right.
And EEG gives us a snapshot of the activity at that particular moment in time.
The MRI is able to kind of specify that.
Specify the spatial location.
Okay.
And EEG is telling about the real-time dynamics.
Right.
As the activity is happening in the brain, we can record it, which is not possible in MRI. So MRI and EEG usually complement each other perfectly. So these oscillations can coexist. There's potential to coexist, but usually they don't coexist in most people in the waking state or in the other states which they are usually in. What do I mean by that? Is that theta and gamma usually can't coexist. Gamma for sustained state. Gamma happens in a burst.
It's like deeply hypnotic and you're mentally active.
Exactly. That's something which is not usually seen in most people. And this is what we observed in meditators. We observed this coupling between low frequency and high frequency.
Okay.
Coupling of low frequencies, theta, for example, with beta gamma.
Very interesting.
So this is one of the major findings in my study, which I think is very fascinating because it's also been reported in some of the advanced monks, Tibetan monks, and yogis, and in fact, actually, I should share this. Some of my control volunteers, they found it very counterintuitive when I asked them what their mental state was. So they either reported being very relaxed, tending towards drowsiness, or they reported being alert, hyper alert. But they found it very counterintuitive to be alert and relaxed at the same time.
Which is what meditation
is doing actually.
Okay.
And so either we found people very relaxed and drowsy or very agitated mind, not this combination of alertness and relaxation happening at the same time. So this is one of the first markers we found in the resting state data.
Right.
We found in the advanced, I'm just talking about the advanced meditators right now, we found frontal midline theta oscillations. So this is the frontal midline region basically. So this is the frontal lobe, this is the frontal midline region, which has produced theta oscillations more in the resting state for the advanced meditators compared to the other groups.
Right.
And this is a big thing because frontal midline theta indicates altered traits.
Right.
So this frontal midline theta indicates activity of a brain region called as anterior cingulate cortex, which is an important brain hub, which is implicated in whole range of functions ranging from attention to
self-regulation. If you were to specify what these trait effects were?
Yes. So this is one of the trait effects actually. Enhanced frontal midline theta power.
Right.
So usually we measure oscillations in terms of power. How basically it's amplitude squared. How big is the wave in that sense? How synchronized, big is not the right word. How synchronized is the wave? So if somebody's power is more, that means that brain power is more. That means that more neural networks are synchronized.
Getting fired up.
They're fired up in a synchronized manner compared to somebody's whose brain power is lower, which means that more of desynchronization is happening in those neural networks. So we observed enhanced frontal midline theta power in the advanced meditators during the resting state, which again, as I told, indicates the activity of the anterior cingulate cortex, which is a important brain hub implicated in attention, self-regulation, modulation of the autonomic nervous system, and meta-awareness.
Okay.
So these are the 4 important things which anterior cingulate cortex does. And we found increased frontal midline theta, which indicates an enhanced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex. which I think is the crux of what meditation does.
Right. If we can take a small detour.
Yes.
Previously, we spoke about the what was that? The basically the zombie mode, autopilot mode. What was it called?
The alpha
Default
default mode network.
DMN. Yes.
We have not come into that yet, but
Okay.
we'll come into it.
Okay.
Yes,
Sure.
yes. So yeah, that's a big story altogether, DMN, because that's one of the findings which we observed in the MRI, part of the study. So yeah, I think we'll come back to the resting state first, because we are still in the resting state and what it did. So this indicates altered traits, the increase in frontal midline theta, which has been observed in most experts of meditation, expert meditators, basically. All these Olympic level meditators.
Okay.
Monks, advanced Tibetan monks, and advanced Tibetan yogis. That's where we have observed these frontal midline theta oscillations.
How did you get a hold of these guys?
No, not we mean in the literature, not in our lab. We have not studied Tibetan monks yet. But this is what has been reported in the literature, scientific literature, which
difficult to get them.
Yes, but we can do actually.
Right.
We are going to have some collaborations with the monks, Tibetan monks. So this is what we found, and the difference in power was huge. It was like, probably I can show you some of the graphs later, the figures. There's huge increase in power in the frontal midline theta oscillations, which was, I think, what meditation does ultimately. And this was the first trait effect we observed. And then we observed an increase in beta power as well for the advanced meditators.
Okay.
Increase in beta power.
That implies what?
Implies alertness.
Okay.
Active alertness without causing agitation. Because if there's an active alertness with agitation, you would not find an increase in the low frequency power, as we observed. So this is alertness and relaxation happening at the same time. And at the same time, these people were in a state of awareness. Because ACC is implicated again in something called as meta-awareness, which is the term which we use to indicate that the person is in touch with something within themselves, which is beyond the mind.
Okay.
That state of awareness, which is beyond all the identities, which is beyond all the memory.
How do you measure that though?
We can't measure awareness as such, but when awareness leaves, when somebody is in touch with something like awareness, that dimension beyond the mind, it leaves a footprint in the brain, which can be measured. And studies across traditions in the advanced meditators has shown that frontal midline theta is one of the markers of that state of awareness. And that's what we observed in the advanced practitioners. And we did not find this in the beginners, actually, who are probably still not there yet.
Other than the, I want to understand the implications in more practical terms.
Exactly.
So other than the aspect of, these two frequencies, or, beta and the theta happening at the same time, what does this imply outside of this definition that you're intensely alert yet relaxed?
Exactly.
What does it imply outside of this?
So one of the easiest ways of looking at this is, say, frontal midline theta is involved in self-regulation. ACC, which is important in self-regulation.
Right.
And everything that we have right now, all the chronic lifestyle disorders and mental health illnesses, fundamentally is because of not training our mind to self-regulate itself.
Yes.
Fundamentally not employing attention in a voluntary manner, not employing various faculties of mind we have in a very voluntary manner. It's happening unconsciously and automatically.
Yeah. So self-regulation, can it also be defined as a conscious response?
Conscious response to what's happening around, rather than automatically, unconsciously reacting to everything that's happening around us.
That, for example, there's an aggressor, something, in my environment is trying to, say, threaten my survival.
Correct.
to a certain extent, maybe, or perceived as. If your boss is yelling at you, it is perceived as a
stressful event. Correct.
Yeah, because the biological response to it is as such. But if one starts to self-regulate,
correct,
then this is something which comes
exactly. This is like totally being in charge of who you are as a person, being in total charge of the situation in which we are in, being in total charge of our responses. Because it's like what happens around us, we can never decide. There's so many factors which can go wrong in what's happening around us, but still how we respond can be within us, can be in our
right
choice. That's what this indicates. That's what increased frontal midline theta indicates.
Right.
We are in that space of conscious response all the time.
This is kind of like the center of spirituality, actually.
This is the crux of spirituality.
Yeah.
How do we always be in that state of conscious response rather than unconscious reactions?
Yeah.
I think that's what every spiritual practice is doing ultimately. How do we distance ourselves from the memory of the past?
Yeah.
How do we come to that space of being completely present every moment and not letting the past decide our current moment response and the future next moment's response? How do we distance ourselves from the past and be totally present and respond according to the context of the situation? And that's what meditation does, and that is what we observed in the resting state.
Right.
So this is the implication of what it is, the implication of the finding of frontal midline theta and what it implies.
Right.
At the same time, it also indicates the state of relaxation, always being in a state of relaxation and not being agitated and being in that chronic low grade stress, which most people are in these days. This chronic low grade stress, it's like, every once in a while something can trigger us. And this, if it persists, can lead to inflammation, and that can lead to all the major lifestyle disorders ranging from diabetes to obesity to cancer to depression, anxiety. So many things are controlled by this inflammation. So how do we take charge of this inflammation and keep the inflammatory response low? And that can happen if we are in a state of relaxation, which is called as, in a way, relaxation response. So there's stress response, or the flight or fight response, and the relaxation response, which is opposite of the flight or fight response. I think that's what meditation is doing, and that's the finding which we have in the data.
Moving on with your findings.
Yes. So these brain oscillations are also very context dependent, in the sense that theta can also be high if somebody is anxious.
Okay.
Beta can also be high when somebody is anxious. Okay. So it all depends on the context of what's happening. And also that's why it's very important to have these subjective measures and something we call as phenomenological measures.
Right. That could be true for a lot of
things.
Biomarkers.
Exactly.
That the context matters.
Context matters. Context matters, and context, and that's why it's important to have these what we call as phenomenological measures. That is, we try to understand what is happening in the mind of the meditator, and then we look at the brain oscillations. If we look at the only brain oscillations, probably we cannot tell anything about what might be happening in the meditator's mind. And that's what ultimately we are trying to understand and study. So this is what we observed. Interestingly, what we observed was a U-shaped pattern in the activation in the advanced meditators, the novice meditators, and the controls. If you look at the beta oscillations, the controls were at this level, and novices were at this level, advanced were at this level. So basically, this is this inward U-shaped pattern.
Right.
Controls and advanced meditators seem to be having the same beta oscillations, the power of beta oscillations.
Okay.
So just looking at the data, we might infer that probably they're in a similar state. But this beta, which we observed in the controls, is because of more active mind, which is tending towards a lot of mind wandering. So when there's a lot of mind wandering, also
DMN,
there's also a lot of beta activity. And also there's also a lot of alpha activity, actually, when there's a lot of mental activity. But this, increase in beta and also alpha, which we found in the advanced meditators, which is at the same level as the controls, indicates more of alertness without mind wandering.
Okay.
There's alertness with a lot of mind wandering. There's alertness with less mind wandering and more relaxation.
That translates to me as even your conscious, your thought processes are also conscious.
Correct. You're conscious of what's happening in the mind. At the same time, you're also, you're also very relaxed. You're conscious, but not, agitated state.
Hyper-vigilant or something.
Hyper-vigilant, not like that, which characterizes anxiety actually.
Right.
They're hyper-vigilant. They're alert actually. A lot of people who are having anxiety are very alert during those states. But at the same time, they're, alert to the point wherein they suffer. Hyper agitated mind, basically.
Right.
And the novices were sitting in between them in the valley kind of thing. So basically, novices are the beginners are in that state wherein they're relaxed. The mental activity is low, but they're not as alert as the advanced practitioners.
Right.
Because of which they sit in this valley between the controls and the advanced practitioners. And that was, I think, one of the very interesting things.
It's quite unpredictable, this.
It's actually unpredictable, but I think...
I mean, I wouldn't have assumed it.
Yes, but I think when we looked at the data, this was what was very clear to us. And somebody, for example, would have probably, without the right understanding of what meditation is doing, would
inferred completely different results.
Completely infer that probably controls at the same level as advanced practitioners.
But actually what's happening is you're telling those people to chill out a little first,
correct.
to calm down, and then amp them up slowly.
Correct, exactly. I think that's one thing which was very interesting in the resting state data. So the key finding in the resting state basically is the frontal midline theta, which is a very prominent thing which we observed. And then this was the major finding from the resting state data. And then moving on to the pranayam, the results become very, very fascinating as we go forward. This is the first study which is looking at different types of practices in the same paradigm.
Okay.
So no study has previously looked at three different types of yogic practices in the same design, like including pranayam and 2 different types of meditation. Usually what scientists do is
lump together.
Yes, they study one form of meditation or they study one form of practice and not have in the same design different practices. So what happens is, if we study the dynamics of these practices in the same design, we can understand the differences we can understand the nuances better of what these practices are doing. Because as we all know, as most practitioners know, the effects of pranayama are different from the effects of meditation, especially in the beginning stages. And especially in somebody like controls, like the meditation naive controls who were not exposed to any form of meditation before, the differences are very stark. Pranayama and all these things. So in that way, this study was quite unique, which looked at Sukha Kriya, breath watching, which is an attention-based practice, and Shunya, which is a non-dual awareness practice. So coming to the Sukha Kriya, we asked all the participants to do Sukha Kriya, which is the first step in the Shambhavi Mahamudra Kriya. And then we asked the controls, we taught them similar practice, just before the session began, so that we can compare what happens in the brains of all these people. Somebody's doing for the very first time, never did pranayama before, for the very first time doing pranayama, same pranayama, alternative nostril breathing pranayama. And somebody who's been doing pranayama for short time, and somebody who's been doing this for a very long time. What are the different signatures? So coming to the findings, coming to what we found, we observed, again, very interestingly, we observed frontal midline theta. So what we're doing is frontal midline theta in the controls. That's very interesting.
Okay.
So we have looked at the data during pranayama in comparison to their own resting state.
Okay.
So we are looking at the resting state of the controls.
What is changing?
What is changing, basically? It's the state effect. State effect of pranayama, how it is changing from the resting state to the pranayama state. We are looking at this in all the three groups. First, let us discuss about what happened in the controls, and then we can talk about the meditators.
Sure.
In the controls, just 6 minutes of pranayama produced frontal midline theta oscillations, which is very, very interesting because simple practice, a very simple practice which they're doing for the very first time is inducing these frontal midline theta oscillations, which implies a short practice can also influence a region like anterior cingulate cortex,
right,
which is compelling because somebody is anxious or stressed out. A simple practice can actually make them feel better.
Within 6 minutes.
Instantly. Within 6 minutes, they can feel better. Objectively, we have marker for that right now. And because we are at a state wherein people are looking for quick relief.
Right.
People don't want to invest months of yoga practice, months of meditation to find benefit, to find, effects. They're looking for something which is much more quicker in nature. That's where I think pranayama comes into the picture, and it plays a big role in terms of what it can do within a short span of time. And recent meta-analysis studies have shown that pranayama practices are comparable to the first line treatments for mental health issues like anxiety and depression, which is, for example, the first line treatment right now, gold standard for depression is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a gold standard. And studies show that meta-analysis is basically, the highest line of evidence. Even in research studies, we have different levels of evidence.
Yes.
So the meta-analysis is considered to be the highest level of evidence. And this meta-analysis shows that the pranayama practice is comparable to cognitive behavioral therapy when it comes to anxiety and depression.
Okay.
Which is very, very interesting because
it's like undeniable now.
It's undeniable, but at the same time, it's very important to mention the limitation of the current evidence.
Of course.
So they also mentioned that this particular meta-analysis also mentioned that there's a moderate risk of bias in the studies. That's because studies have employed subjective measures. For example, somebody does pranayama, we ask the participant how they feel after that. These are the subjective markers. They themselves report how they felt.
Right.
So that lends a bias.
Yeah, that they have done something. So I must feel in a certain way.
There can be certain bias in their rating of themselves.
That must be included.
Correct. So that meta-analysis showed that there's a moderate risk of bias in the studies. And how do we overcome that risk of bias? By including more objective measures.
The
Biomarkers. Objective measures like brain imaging, for example, or brain oscillations. And that's what we try to do. We try to bridge the gap between the subjective measures and the compelling scientific data, the objective measures. And we observing this increase in frontal midline theta indicates that there's a strong basis to their subjective report of feeling better after the practice.
Right.
So this kind of bridges the gap, and it's very important because pranayama can be adopted at a very wide scale.
Right.
Simple, something like Nadishuddhi pranayama, which is simple practice which is available on YouTube.
Yes.
Which can be practiced by anyone of any age, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And it's cost effective. It can be employed wide scale, and people can find benefit out of it.
It's interesting to me that science is looking at, pranayama also, if you ask me, shouldn't be lumped as one practice.
Exactly. That's what they're doing actually. They're labeling this breath work.
Yes. So manipulation of the breath, how the air travels in the body. This is what pranayama essentially is. Through that, you're manipulating the life force. That's how we look at it.
You're looking at this is more like we are manipulating the breath to change the mental
yes, that
structure.
That is there, but for example, this is not to comment anything upon your research, but for example, Sukha Kriya and Nadi Shuddhi, these two
Correct.
pranayam forms you mentioned,
Yes.
we look at it as completely different things.
In terms, yes, that's true.
Because Nadi Shuddhi, we look at it as something which is, again, I would say it is more leaning towards the
Cleansing of the.
it is cleansing of the, how we say, Nadi Shuddhi, cleansing of the nadis, but it is more, the state is going to be more temporary.
Correct.
Whereas in Sukha Kriya, you're addressing two different things. There is an energetic aspect to it. So Sukha Kriya is going to be much more long term. You're trying to build up a system. You're cleansing the nadis, the energetic system, how we say.
Right.
But at the same time, you're building it up also.
Right, that's true.
The cleansing part hence gets comparatively reduced at a certain cost of building the energetic system up.
Right.
So we do Sukha Kriya in certain situations. Again, the context matters. People say, no, this is alternative. No, it's completely different. That Nadi Shuddhi is just cleansing, whereas Sukha Kriya is cleansing and yes, you build it up so that you're able to handle higher states
of energy.
That is done over courses of 6 months, 1 year. Nadi Shuddhi is instantaneous
benefit.
So we look at it as completely different things, but it is still good to see that at least some research is happening. But the categorization is going to be obviously very different from the yogic perspective, and it's going to be very different from the scientific perspective. This is something that I'm observing.
Yes, I think yes, it makes sense because yogic practices are much more deeper than we realize, and I think what you said is completely true in the sense that Sukha Kriya is much more deeper in its impact.
Yeah.
And it needs initiation.
Yes.
Whereas Nadi Shuddhi can be employed wide scale, which doesn't need initiation as such. So I think that's the power of something like pranayama, which produces immediate benefits compared to, say, breath watching, which needs much more.
Again, more preparation.
More time and effort goes into it.
Right.
And because ultimately it's much tougher to deal with the mind than dealing with the breath.
Right.
It's much easier to handle the mind through the breath.
Yeah, because if you actually address the mind directly, your breath is going to change as a consequence.
Correct.
So the yogis back in the day found out the reverse is also true.
Exactly. And that's what
those who cannot directly right now
can handle the breath.
Yes, it can be reverse engineered. We can say.
What pranayama does for a lot of people is that it gives them a sense of perceived control over their own state. That perceived sense of control over what's happening within themselves is a very important factor when it comes to dealing with anxiety or depression. That might not happen with something like meditation in the beginning, because you're anxious, you're depressed, or you're stressed out. You sit for meditation, probably that might go up. The feeling of anxiety actually can go up in the initial stages.
Because you're hyper aware of it.
Yes. But with pranayama, you can actually work towards becoming better.
Yeah.
And probably it might be even better with something like Surya Kriya, which is more effective in terms of what it can do immediately in span of 30 minutes, something like that. So that's what we observed in the controls. We observed this frontal midline theta oscillations after this short pranayama session, which is very, very interesting in terms of the implications of what it can be at a larger scale. And then coming to the meditators, we observed that for both beginners, the novice Isha practitioners, and the advanced Isha practitioners, we observed an increase in both low frequency and high frequency oscillations at the same time.
Okay.
Which we did not observe in the controls. So it is this perceived sense of control which a person has over their own mental state, which gives a lot of benefits. Having control that, okay, through breath, I can lower my anxiety. That simple sense of control over one's physiology, one's mental state, is itself a big empowering factor.
Yes.
When it comes to how we deal with anxiety and depression. And that's what this frontal midline theta oscillations in the controls indicates. And we did not observe any changes in the high frequency oscillations. The beta and gamma, we did not find any changes from the resting state to pranayama state in controls.
Right.
Whereas in the Isha meditators, we observed an increase in low frequency, that is theta alpha, and increase in high frequency, which is beta and gamma, at the same time. Both beginners as well as the advanced Isha practitioners.
Right.
And this indicates a state of relaxed alertness. In controls, there was relaxation happening. In meditators, there was relaxation. At the same time, there's alertness, active alertness happening at the same time. That's a crucial difference in the
distinction, yeah.
What pranayama does for meditators who have been doing it for some time versus somebody who's doing it for the first time. And we also observed an inverted U-shaped pattern. In the resting state, we observed a U-shaped pattern.
Yeah.
In the pranayama, we observed an inverted U-shaped pattern.
Meaning?
That is, controls lie here, novice lie here, advanced lie here.
Okay.
So controls in that sense, novice Isha practitioners in that sense, because they are starting off low, the kind of changes that happen in the
is more drastic
for the beginners than even the advanced practitioners.
Right.
Because advanced practitioners, to begin with, the baseline is elevated. So they are not going much further up than their own baseline.
Right.
Whereas beginners, their baseline is little lower, but they go much higher. The difference is more higher in the beginners than even in the advanced practitioners. This is again very, very interesting observation, because probably they feel much more changes in their own system when they do the practice.
But it makes sense because what happens is we are looking at it in terms of a tool.
Correct.
The pranayama is a tool. It's a method. After a certain point, you let go of the tools also once you've arrived at a certain state. So it makes sense that the tool may prove to be not as effective or not as impactful on the advanced meditators as on the
that's one
newbies.
way of looking at it. At the same time, another way of looking at it is, which is what we proposed, and also which falls in line with
the baseline you're talking about?
Not the baseline, this observation, this inverted U-shaped pattern, more in the beginners and less in the advanced, which also falls in line with the previous studies in various schools of meditation, is that advanced practitioners, as they progress in their journey, the practices become more effortless.
Okay.
And for the beginners, it's still effortful in some way or the other. This inverted U-shaped pattern indicates the effortful state of practice which they're doing.
Okay.
Whereas in the teachers and the advanced practitioners, it's more effortless. It just happens. People tell me that it just happens. Even 1 hour they do it, it just happens by itself. This happening by itself or coming into a state of ease within themselves.
It's like learning. It's
learning like something like learning a music instrument.
Or like learning how to ride a bike versus knowing how to ride a bike.
Correct. So for example, in the initial days of learning a bike, we find it so effortful. And then as we keep on riding it,
but once you get it,
it just becomes effortless. And that's what is happening even in pranayama. This is observation. And this was interesting because the changes in the brain oscillations were global in the beginners. There was a global change in oscillations, low frequency and high frequency in the beginners. Whereas the advanced, the changes were more local in nature, not global, which indicates this effortless state of pranayama. And that's the
bell curve.
That's the inverted bell curve, and that's the understanding of what is happening behind the screen. I mean the pranayama.
Right.
After that, we had breath watching session for again 15 minutes approximately. We gave the instructions to the controls before breath watching, what needs to be done, all that different instructions. And then we observed that 50% of the controls, the meditation naive controls, they reported drowsiness during breath watching, which reflected again in the brain oscillations, like increase in alpha power, decrease in alpha power, and increase in theta power. Basically, the drowsy state, which again is very interesting because one of the biggest hindrances to a meditation practitioner is drowsiness. According to me, there are two big hindrances. One is hyperactivity of mind. One is dullness of mind. Yes. So dullness of mind, 50% of the controls we observed, drowsiness. They just became drowsy, which they did not during pranayama, of course, because you need an active involvement from your side to do pranayama, which is not required in breath watching. And I think that's why pranayama is more effective in the short term for people who are just entering into the field of meditation and yoga. And for the meditators, we observed again increase in low frequency and high frequency. So basically, a state of relaxed alertness. We found both no beginners and the advanced same levels of relaxed alertness, in contrast to pranayama actually. And this again very interesting because relaxation and intensity of alertness is happening at the same time. And for a very long, this is very interesting because for a very long time in the 1970s and 1960s to 80s, during that time, meditation was looked at more as a relaxation tool. So this whole movement called as relaxation response, which was spearheaded by Herbert Benson from Harvard. And there's a lot of misunderstanding that
it's a very primitive understanding.
That meditation is something which only relaxes you, which calms you down.
They know hyperactivity, so they compensate and look at this as a solution.
Relaxed.
Yes.
But the whole point of meditation is you become relaxed. At the same time, you don't become dull. You become actually very alert and much more alert than your usual states of wakefulness.
So like the productivity oriented people, the people who are working in corporations in a very high capacity, high functioning tasks they're doing, they often look at meditation as, you're sitting like a dumb idiot.
Yes.
This narrative needs to change.
Exactly. I think that's what probably most people have about what meditation is. And even before I did my practices, like way back in 14 and 13, that was my understanding of meditation. Why are these people wasting time just sitting idle? And and most people actually, you see people meditating, you see them in a drowsy state. They don't come out of meditation with more energy and more intensity. They feel more on the lower level of who we are. And that I think is a wrong understanding. And this notion has changed in the last 30 years of scientific research. Probably we always had this understanding in the yogic culture that meditation is not just about relaxing, but also being in the state of intensity. But I think in the scientific world, this understanding was predominant early, that meditation is only about relaxation, which changed slowly over a period of time. And now we have a very thorough understanding that meditation is not just about relaxation, but also about raising up your intensity. And that we found a marker, brain marker, which indicates this state of intensity and being relaxed at the same time. That's one of the key findings from the study actually. Because Sadhguru always talks about meditation is about intensity without being tensed, and relaxed, not being lax. How do we attain that state of intensity and relaxation? I think is the crux of the whole problem. And that's what meditation does. How do we remain intense and relaxed at the same time? And we find a neurophysiological marker in terms of increase in low frequency and increase in high frequency oscillations at the same time. And that's the finding from the breath watching state. After breath watching, what we did was we gave the meditators and the controls certain questionnaires to find out what was happening to them during meditation. So we gave them meditation depth questionnaires, which measures various aspects of meditation. So this is a 120 questionnaire, which measures 5 different components of a meditation practice.
Okay.
Hindrances, relaxation, concentration, essential qualities like love and that transcendence, all that, and then non-duality. So it measures these 5 different aspects of any meditation practice, and it gives a cumulative score out of these 120 questions. And then we kind of correlate this score with the brain oscillations.
Okay.
So basically, we are looking at how the meditators felt subjectively. We're correlating that with the brain markers, oscillations.
Right.
And the meditation depth score for the advanced meditators was 86 out of 120. It's the mean score.
Is that like the self-reported score?
Self-reported score.
Okay.
Self-reported meditation depth score was 86 for the advanced. This is the mean score.
Right.
86 out of 120 for the advanced practitioners, and it was close to 42 for the controls. And the beginners were in between. So basically, there's a doubling of self-reported meditation depth, which correlated with the brain oscillations.
Right.
Subjectively, they felt in that state, and objectively, we could observe that they were in that state. That's the beauty of the whole thing, actually. And interestingly, what we also observed was that of all the components of the meditation depth, non-duality was higher only in the advanced practitioners.
Shunya.
No, the non-duality component of even breath watching.
Okay.
So even breath watching, after a certain state, it goes to that state of, it merges with, one merges with the breath of what's happening. So we observed higher non-duality only in the advanced practitioners, and we did not find differences in non-duality between the controls and the beginners. But whereas we found a lot of differences in concentration, relaxation, and essential qualities in the beginners compared to the controls.
How are you defining non-duality here in terms of?
In terms of the questions. So there are some questions about, object and subject. There was no distinction between subject and object. I experienced unity of consciousness. There are some questions like that which measure non-duality aspect of meditation, which is what we looked at, and that was very high in the advanced practitioners, and there was no difference between the controls and the beginners. This was the meditation depth questionnaire which we used, and at the same time we also had sleepiness questionnaires before meditation and after meditation, because sleep is a very big confounding factor in meditation research, and a lot of previous research has not taken into consideration the role of sleep or drowsiness in that sense, because when drowsiness goes up, also theta goes up.
Okay.
So theta oscillations can go up in drowsiness. It can also go up in meditation.
Yeah.
How do we know whether it's because of drowsiness that meditators report theta, or is it because of meditation they report theta? For that, we had the sleepiness questionnaires, and again that revealed that controls were drowsy and meditators were not drowsy.
Yeah.
So that ruled out that theta is caused, increase in theta is because of drowsiness. So this is how we eliminate the confounding factors.
Right. This is interesting because we often look at the switching of states, say between deep sleep to dreaming, dreaming to wakefulness, wakefulness to again sleep. The switch, when it happens, the transition, we view it as a certain opportunity, a certain window.
Correct.
Many authors, I have heard, would go into that drowsy state and then get up and write all their ideas down.
Correct.
All their
creative insights and all that.
Yes, yeah. But this can also be done in a very conscious way.
Conscious way, correct.
If you're meditating, you can also do it.
That state.
Yeah.
But again, it's a very slippery slope in the sense that drowsiness can lead to.
Yeah, it's a tightrope, you fall this side.
Exactly, yeah.
There's drowsiness and sleep, and you fall this side, there's hyperactivity and all of that.
Yes, it's a very slippery slope, and I think that needs a lot of practice. Because I've, as a meditator myself, have seen how how much time it takes to really get there where you're relaxed but not drowsy.
Certain states also we say are become available to you during those states.
The transition states.
The transition states. People often use, we spoke about psychedelics, but for example, your marijuana, all of this came into the culture. Now it's used in a different way. It's some are abusing it, some are using it. But this to arrive at that drowsy state, that perfect, you're kind of not really, it's a very lucid state actually.
Lucid state.
Right? Yes, even it has some role in lucid dreaming also, that you arrive at that.
Yes, lucid dreaming again, very interesting, because we have done a lot of research on lucid dreaming actually. I think that's a whole discussion altogether. But I think there's
Let's
so
not
many.
Open that can of worms.
Yes. There's so many states of consciousness which are really, really worth exploring, which I think has not much research has not gone into it yet.
Yeah.
But as you said, it provides opportunities for creative insight, which some scientists have relied upon. A famous example, Medvedev, the insights about periodic table actually he got from that kind of state. That, and even the benzene, the structure. Yes, that he got it in a certain state like that. It's like a snake rolling around. That's the structure of benzene with double bonds and single bonds like that. So that he got in a dream state, and then he went about and looked at it, and then found that that's the structure of benzene molecule. So I think people have attained certain states of insight through these things. But meditation is more sustainable and also more systematic way of coming at that state than something happening by chance.
Yes.
I think, yes, that's what. And then after the breath watching, we had a resting session again. And then after that, we had a cognitive task to measure cognition.
How did the drowsy people do?
No, they come back. It's like it's only in the few minutes of breath watching. Once the session, we go to the next session, they come out of the drowsiness state because it's more active state wherein you have to look at a point. Right. So again, you open your eyes, you become again alert towards what's happening. It's just a temporary phase of little drowsiness. No, we did not find anybody sleeping completely. It was just a drowsy state, little lowering of the mental activity.
You should see as a yoga teacher how many people sleep during meditation. People start snoring.
Yeah, I think that
everybody's meditating, one guy will go
snoring. Yeah, it's quite tough actually. It's really tough to be alert and relaxed at the same time.
Tea was, implemented just for the sole reason.
Yes, tea was one of the reasons why people like they found a way to be alert through an external substance.
The Buddhist monks.
Did
that.
But we have a lot of kriyas which will take care of the energy aspect of it.
Yes, true.
Because it's important to also have an active task which measures cognition to an extent, not just telling that meditation improves attention. Does it really improve attention in a task? That's what we kind of looked at. So this task, it's called as an oddball paradigm in the literature. So basically, what is looked at in this paradigm is that there are different kinds of images coming on the screen. So you have to gaze at a point on the screen, and there'll be different images coming on the screen, left side and right side. 80% of the time, images will come on one side, and 20% of the times it comes on the other side of the screen. So this 20% of the time, what the images come, these are called as oddball trials. So 80% and 20%. That's the ratio which scientists employ usually in how the images are presented. And what happens is that brain produces these unique responses to the stimuli, which are called as ERPs, or event-related potentials. So a unique brain response to any stimuli. So any visual stimuli or any auditory stimuli, any stimuli that we have, brain produces a response. And this response can be quantified and compared between groups. So when we had these oddball trials, brain produces a typical response.
What kind of images would you put?
These are just normal black and white. These are called as Mooney images. The standard trials.
Standard. Not display art.
No. These are all standard images in the cognitive neuroscience field, which will take care of many confounding factors. All standardized measures. These are black and white, and they should need to be in certain proportion, the images, and certain contrast. These are all standardized.
Kind of like Rorschach tests, but standardized.
Correct. Very standardized for this kind of paradigm. And then when certain stimuli comes, which is like oddball, that is infrequent trial, brain produces a unique response. Because it's like everything is coming on the left side, for example. Suddenly something comes on the right side. Your brain thinks that it's a novel thing.
Okay.
Because until that point of time, brain is categorizing, okay, it's all left side, left side, left side. Suddenly something pops out and comes on the right side. That's a novel thing for the brain. It's something called a salient. It's salient for the brain in terms that something which is happening consistently has broke the pattern. Brain devotes certain attentional resources to that salient stimuli. So our brain is wired in such a way that anything salient, it devotes energy. It devotes attention to anything which pops out.
Right.
So you're walking on the road and suddenly something comes into your consciousness.
Right. Is this like a survival instinct?
Correct. Exactly.
That in the jungle we are looking and we're looking for changes happening.
Changes happening. So same thing applies to you. We're going in traffic. Suddenly you hear the ambulance sound.
Right.
It's something which captures our attention. It's a salient stimuli in that context. Similarly, this oddball is like a salient stimulus for the brain, which devotes some energy to the salient stimuli.
Right.
And then we look at this ERP, which is called as P300. That is the response produced by the brain after the event, which is 300 milliseconds after the presentation of stimuli.
Okay.
A stimuli comes right now. 300 milliseconds later, there's a particular response, which indicates allocation of attention to that stimuli.
Okay.
And also working memory. It indicates working memory and attention to that stimuli. So what we observed was that for the advanced meditators, there was an increase in the P300 amplitude.
Okay.
So P300 is like a wave.
So that means more resources are allocated.
More attention towards. It's like they're in an ongoing state of attention. They're not. It's like brain is alert in that sense.
Okay, so they're able to switch and allocate attention
more effectively.
More effectively,
right. And also it indicates. It indicates a trait attention. What we found in the resting state was that there was already higher frontal midline theta, which indicates an attentional, enhancement. Naturally, they're in a more they're in a more attentive state.
Right.
And this reflected in the P300 marker, basically. And also, what's interesting is that for the other two groups, we found that the resource allocation is more localized. But whereas for the advanced practitioners, it's more distributed. It's more global in nature.
Right.
That is, they're able to synchronize large brain regions
much quicker
towards attention.
Right. And what are the practical implications of this?
Again, your attention is more focused, and also at the same time, because attention and working memory happen together.
Okay. What is working memory?
Working memory is what you hold in memory at a particular moment
of time. Like your RAM?
Yeah, kind of RAM. So it's like I ask you to remember, I give you a phone number and ask you to remember right now.
I've already forgotten.
You're using your working memory to hold that information in the mind. So what you hold in your mind at any particular instant of time, that's working memory. Okay. And this working memory gets transferred to long-term memory with repetition. Working memory need not always get translated to long-term memory.
Right.
There's a repetition which needs to happen. But for working memory to happen, attention is required. Working memory cannot happen without attention.
That's very interesting.
So attention leads to working memory because you don't pay attention, there's no way you can even memorize something.
Yes. Yeah.
So attention and working memory happen together. This attention and working memory is higher in the advanced practitioners, as indicated by this P300. So this has large implications because attention and memory is the crux of cognition.
Right.
And everything that we are doing, say increase in productivity at office, increase in efficiency, output, everything is dependent on attention and memory.
Entering into the neuroplasticity region here?
Exactly. This indicates neuroplasticity in the sense that people
higher learning capabilities
and also much more efficient in the sense that you are able to recruit the entire more global brain networks
right
for attention and working memory, which means that you are somehow able to bring in this whole brain synchronization
right
towards a particular thing, which is very important for cognition
right
per se. And implications are huge because everything that we deem as success or productivity in that sense is about memory and attention.
Yeah.
How well one can pay attention and how well one can memorize what they're paying attention to. So huge implications in education sector, implications in every field of endeavor.
Yeah, there's this one practical implication which I'm assuming here is that the more you get, the more you learn, the more you get good at learning.
Correct.
So regardless of the task, the subject which you're learning, if you're just used to adapting to newer and newer new information and piecing it together, you just get better at it.
Better at it, and also better at retaining it. Information acquisition is one thing, and information retention is another thing.
Yeah.
So meditation actually helps in both. It helps in acquiring.
Retention would be memory.
Exactly.
Whereas we are not necessarily always memorizing things.
We are not memorizing
if I'm learning how to paint, I'm not necessarily memorizing things.
So memory, again, what you're talking about is
new neural connections.
Procedural memory.
Right.
Something how to paint, that's procedural memory. What we are talking about is more like what we call as episodic memory and semantic memory.
Right.
So memory is also again different types, ranging from declarative memory to non-declarative memory.
Okay, what is that?
So declarative memory is something like semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory is the information about names,
labeling
and facts, place of remembering places, remembering phone numbers. Terminologies, basically. That's called semantic memory. And episodic memory is the memory of episodes.
What happened?
The episodes of it. Not the names of it, but episodes. I went for a trip. What happened in the trip?
Right.
Somebody will be able to better recollect episodes than somebody else.
And these two are connected in terms of the practice.
Correct.
Increasing both.
No, we're not talking about, we're not measuring those things in the study. It's just the working memory we look at, a simple paradigm. We're not measuring the other aspects of memory. But just for the, more clarification, we have not looked into the semantic memory, episodic memory, that need more cognitive paradigms.
Different tests.
To measure that. And then there is
diverse.
That will be too long. Long, and also it becomes boring after a certain point of time.
Really? Why?
No, because the more you sit, the more you sit in the lab, the more taxing it becomes after a certain point of time.
Really?
Especially for the controls.
Okay.
Probably meditators can sit for a longer time, but you asking somebody who's never meditated before to sit in one place for 2 hours, which is very difficult. And I think, the third is the procedural memory, which is memory of innate skills. The painting that you're describing, riding a bike. These are all procedural skills that we have. And that, as well as semantic episodic memory, everything depends on attention. If you don't pay attention to something, nothing of this happens. And how well we can pay attention to something determines all these aspects of memory.
Is there an endurance aspect to this? Because how long can you pay attention to things?
Exactly. That's called a sustained attention in the literature. So again, attention is of various types, because we tend to say attention as one thing, but attention has many components to it. So usually we describe something as focused attention.
Right.
How well you can focus on something. How concentrated your attention is, how penetrative your attention is towards something. That's the focused attention. Then there's something called as sustained attention, or it's also called as vigilance, in the sense that how sustained can you keep that focused attention. It's not like only one moment you focus and then you're
attention.
Exactly. How sustained you can keep that attention. And then there's something called as executive control. How well can you come back to what you're paying attention to when distractions come. Even that's a very
Management of attention.
How quickly you can come back from mind wandering to attention.
Right.
That's a very important skill when it comes to self-regulation, because I'm working on a task and so a thought comes and then I get lost in the mind wandering. How quickly can I understand that I have got a thought and come back to what I'm doing? That's a very important skill in any field, actually. And that's what executive control does. So there's focused attention, sustained attention, and executive control. And there's another component, which is alertness. Alertness to what we are paying attention to. Attention can be either paid with full alertness or meager alertness. So there are all these different components, and meditation can influence all these components of attention. And
this is crucial because I was listening to this podcast where I think it was Andrew Huberman or somebody else in this field, and they were talking about how the wandering mind is the unhappy mind.
Exactly. Actually, that's the title of a paper.
Yeah.
That's the title of a very famous study published in Science, which they called as a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. It's like that was an interesting study because they measured people's mental state at different intervals of the day. They used to give these probes through text messages in an app and measure whether they were mind wandering at that moment or present in whatever they were doing. So whenever they found that actually 50%, 47%, I think to be precise, 47% of the times people were wandering. So they were never present.
There could be times they do not know that it's wandering.
Correct. It's just what they measured.
Yeah.
And it's like half of the times you're not present to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
the happiness aspect comes in where it's not important what you're doing, but how you're doing it. How present are you in doing it?
How present you are in doing it. And
that was kind of the summary of the thing, right? Like kind
of they also looked at this wandering. Okay. Whenever the people were wandering, what they found was that they were wandering towards things that are unpleasant. So mind wandering, it's not always pleasant. You can wander even pleasant manner. You can think about pleasant things.
Arguing with somebody in your head, imaginary.
Pleasant, in a pleasant manner, which causes pleasantness. But unfortunately, what they found was whenever people were wandering, they were thinking more about unpleasant things, which caused them suffering.
Because conscious imagination is always, it's nice. It's nicer. You paint a better picture in your mind when it's conscious.
Conscious imagination.
But when it's like low-powered, blah 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 in your mind, it's mostly just
an ongoing.
Yeah.
And I think mind wandering is important for creativity. Creative people actually wander a lot. They have a lot of keen sense of imagination, but at the same time, that mind wandering should not lead to anxiety, suffering.
Right.
It should not lead to suffering because often what happens is that this is called as cognitive reification in psychology.
Cognitive
reification.
Okay.
Wherein a person who is thinking something, they think that what they're thinking is reality.
Okay.
That's called as cognitive reification, where the sense of self is reified with what they're thinking.
Right.
That is the crux of mental health problem.
Thoughts weighing down heavy.
Thoughts weighing down heavy and thinking that thought is the reality. Thinking that memory and imagination is the reality. Not differentiating between what is memory and what is imagination is what causes mental health issues actually. The crux of the problem is that.
Right.
So this, it's also called as thought stickiness. Thought stickiness in the sense that you get stuck with your thoughts.
Identified with it.
You get identified so strongly with your thoughts that you're not able to distinguish between what is thought and what is right now. That also happens with mind wandering. So if mind wandering happens consciously, I think it's powerful. But if mind wandering happens unconsciously and automatically, that causes suffering.
It's like somebody abused you on the street. That abuse happened once.
But you repeat it.
Through the day, you're thinking about it, and then it kind of accelerates and gains momentum.
Right.
Till the time you're like cursing that person.
Exactly. That's what is causing suffering.
And if you want to disengage, you can just, convince yourself actually, or counsel yourself out of it.
Correct.
And you say, okay, that's over. So I don't need to abuse myself again and again.
Right. Actually, this is what even cognitive behavioral therapy is doing in a sense. It's like doing, making people realize that your thoughts need not define who you are. It's somehow, because people think that thought is reality.
Right.
How do we change that? How do we
reason
change
themselves? You have to reason them out of it.
Correct. How do you
Not
change
necessarily,
your...
actually, if you think about it.
Huh.
There's
How do
no
you reason
reason.
yourself
It's
out of
not
it?
necessary, the reasoning out. But I feel most people need it. You need a logical kind of a ladder to come out of it.
Correct.
That is what the spiritual parables and all are usually about.
Exactly.
But if you may not need it also, actually. You can just snap out
You
also.
can come out of it, but I think
That is difficult for most people.
it's very difficult. It's very difficult, especially if you're already anxious or depressed. It's much easier to not get there. But once we get there, it's very difficult.
Right.
Because it needs a lot of, because it's so experiential. We can discuss about this. We can logically tell a person that this is not it.
Yeah.
But how
doesn't
do
do
we...
anything for them,
It doesn't do anything. How do you change the feeling?
Yes.
The feeling is so experiential for them. The feeling of depression, the feeling of anxiety is so experiential that you cannot logically bring a person out of it. It needs a much, much, much deeper dive into it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's why I think the relapse rates in depression are very high. Once people, put on medication, and 50% of the times, they go back to depression, even with medication. How do we prevent this relapse from happening is a very difficult thing. It's a big challenge actually right now.
Right.
And all of it has to do with this reification. How do we get a person to a point wherein they realize that your thoughts are not who you are. Your thoughts need not define who you are as a person. Your thought is not a reflection of who you are. The simple understanding and change in perspective experientially is what makes a big difference to somebody who is depressed.
I think this could apply to people outside of depression also.
Everything actually,
right? Because
boils down to this.
We all have certain tendencies, certain thought patterns which we know for a fact are not serving us, which we know we fall into, So the angry person will always fall into that angry state, and if he's conscious, then there is a possibility that he, prevents it from happening as it is happening.
That's right.
But then there will the tendency to fall into it, at least for a certain duration before he has gone through, is going to be very, very high. And I feel everybody has that one thing
which they stick to.
This is one groove everybody has that you kind of have to master, which you're at a disadvantage than other people. So, for example, I know people who have, eating disorders. So they have a tendency to become obese.
Correct.
For somebody like me, it's not that difficult, but I will have something else. It could be a different thought pattern. It could be. So I feel everybody has that. And then you have people going, oh no, but this is so easy. You just stop eating.
It's not easy.
You tell the anorexic person, no, you just have to eat a little bit more. You tell the depressed person, don't be so sad.
No,
So
it's actually very easy to tell like that,
yeah,
but it's so difficult to work.
but when it comes to our own thing,
we
we're like, no,
stick
it's
on
very
to it.
difficult.
No, I think that's the whole point actually.
Yeah.
How do we get huge masses of population wherein they don't get there in the first place? Because once you get there, it's difficult.
Yes, yeah.
And it needs, we don't have right now the proper structure. At the same time, there's a huge disparity between the people requiring treatment and the people providing treatment.
Okay.
So say
in terms
we
of
are
numbers?
1 billion, say 1.3 billion population. How many psychologists do we have? How many psychiatrists do we have? Say if 10% of Indian population becomes psychologically unstable in some way or the other, how do we provide numbers to
We will not be able
treat
to
them? And that's what is happening in the US actually right now. US, according to the recent studies, 1 in every 2 individuals is lonely.
Right.
And loneliness leads to depression, anxiety.
Yeah.
How do we cater to such a huge population with therapy? It's not possible at all. So I think that's the reason we need to incorporate this in education system. How do we make people realize that well-being is a skill which can be learned, just like math and science?
Yeah.
How do we train the mind, just like we train ourselves in mathematics? That's
as important, I feel, the education systems and all need to incorporate a certain understanding of the mechanisms of human nature.
Right.
Be it your own mind, be it attraction, be it, the mating protocols we go through. So many things remain unaddressed.
Yes.
Basic fundamentals, I feel, once it's clear, and that is what we were talking about earlier, that people being so good at one thing,
they miss the other parts.
They miss the fundamentals of life, and because of that, everything gets derailed.
Correct. I think we need to be more open as a society in terms of how we look at these things.
Yeah.
And I think the whole problem is with categorizing things again.
Okay.
This is Hindu, this is not Hindu.
Right.
This is this belief system, this is not this belief system. This is scientific, this is not scientific. This categorization is the problem.
Okay.
How do we come out of this categorization and look at things with openness, with more objective mindset, which is not biased by its
right? Because
past.
we may be missing solutions which are right in front of us.
Exactly, because of categorization.
Right.
I think categorization is the whole problem. And categorization is what brain does best.
Right.
That's the whole problem.
Right.
Because we have this intrinsic nature to categorize.
So this therapist, a friend of mine, was telling me, outside of his medical profession, we were just having a normal conversation. He was telling me that more than half of his clients would not need therapy if they had a good friend or a good partner who would just listen to them, So it is quite surprising to me that sometimes the answers, this may not apply to everybody, but then it may help everybody.
Definitely.
That is for sure.
And even that's not so easy, because how do you listen to somebody keeping your biases aside? I think because we are always looking at somebody who is in a certain state from our own lens of who we are as a person.
Right.
How do we keep that aside and look at the person?
Right.
We might not provide a solution to the person immediately, but I think just listening to the person will make a big difference. Just listening without providing solutions. And this is a very important part of even psychology training. Psychologist is trained to listen first.
Yes.
And not come to conclusion about what the person is going through. I think that's so it again comes down to attention. So it's just at the core of everything. Attention, it's like I'm reminded of this beautiful story which I came across recently, wherein a student asked his Zen master, tell me about one thing which is the most important thing about Zen.
Okay.
He just writes down attention. on the board. That's the only word he writes, and period. That's it. This student is like flustered. Is that it? And then again, the master writes down attention. Period. Then, is this all? Am I here for just this? Then he writes attention, attention, attention. That's it. And the student asks the master, what is attention? The master replies, attention means attention. So that's what he says. Attention means attention. And William James, one of the founders of psychology, in his classic book called as Principles of Psychology, which was published in 1890. So he was the first professor of psychology at Harvard. And he's the leading, the father of psychology, actually. So he writes in his book about attention. So how do we bring this wandering attention back and back is the very root of judgment, character, and will. How do we train ourselves to bring this wandering attention over and over again to what we are focusing attention on? Is the very root of judgment, character, and will. And he was all for methods which can do that.
Right.
That's where meditation comes into the picture.
I feel in spirituality we refer to this indiscriminate kind of attention as presence.
Correct. How do we pay attention indiscriminately?